It's ding ding, two men in a ring. We put pride in your stride and a quiver in your liver. You want 'em, we've got 'em, coming to you. Loud and proud, he's the biggest, he's the baddest. It's Mr. Gavin Davis on the Gavin Davis Podcast Show.
Good evening, everyone, and welcome to another edition of the Gavin Davis Podcast featuring my co-host, Dave Bruff. Tonight's guest is a very good friend of ours, so it's introduction time. This man began training in the 1970s and is now in his 6th decade being active on the mats. He has trained in multiple disciplines, including judo, jiu-jitsu, Brazilian jiu-jitsu, kickboxing, and taekwondo. He is always a student in a lifetime dedicated to martial arts and pushes continuous improvement. An 8th degree black belt under the BJJA and also a chief instructor. Co-owner of Bushido Ban Oldswick. Me and Dave want to welcome to the podcast our friend, Mr. John Idle. John, thank you for joining us, mate.
Good evening, both. Thank you. Thank you for having me.
Good. So what we're going to do, John, we're going to go straight into it. Question number 1 for you. All right. And I want you just to describe your early thoughts and experiences in judo, because I know that's what you started with, and how you fell on jiu-jitsu in 1978.
Okay, well, as a schoolboy, in 1973-74, I began my journey into martial arts with tentative steps into judo. Now, at that time, everyone my age seemed to want to be Bruce Lee. We all wanted to be Bruce Lee at that time. We were all coming out the cinemas making funny noises and leaping around and all that. So naturally, we'd look for a martial arts club to join. Back then, there were not the opportunities there are now. There were few and far between. So a judo club had set up as an evening class in my secondary school. And I went along to that, not really knowing anything about judo at all. No equipment, no gi or anything like that. Just cobbled together an outfit that I thought might do and got among it and got started. I didn't have a long journey in judo, by the way. It was more of an introduction, like dipping my toe into the water of the martial arts journey, I suppose. So I learned some break falls, obviously, and elementary things like basic throwing technique and so on. Didn't do any gradings, didn't do any competitions or anything like that. But it gave me a start, and it must have planted a seed, I suppose. The class folded after a few months due to lack of interest. I think people went to the pictures, wanted to be Bruce Lee, thought they could do it in 2 weeks. And then when they actually got among the reality of it and realized it was going to be a longer and harder journey than they'd anticipated, people would fall by the wayside. So that was my early sort of journey into martial arts generally through the judo. And as an older teenager, then a mate of mine had we were chatting in the pub one night and said I was 19 by then. We were chatting in the pub and he'd said, we ought to do something, we ought to have a hobby or something like that. I said, yeah, my thoughts entirely. I've done a bit of judo in the past. He says, oh, funnily enough, I've done a bit of kung fu over Blackburn way. I said, all right, well, it's a martial art then, isn't it? That sounds like where we're heading. What's on offer? So we had a look at what was out there at the time. The only thing we could find was a jiu-jitsu club. Bob Ashworth's jiu-jitsu club at Skipton. And Bob had a good reputation there, and we went along and loved it, absolutely loved it from day one. So 1978, age 19, my first steps onto a jiu-jitsu mat. Having a few break falls, I could fit in, got going reasonably quickly. Yeah. And loved it from day one. Bob's classes were very intense, very well run, very hard. In those days, training was, I suppose, a little bit more ruthless. The exercises were tough. The training itself was tough. 2-hour sessions. Bob had learned his craft over in the Lowlands in Liverpool, among people like Charlie Allmark, Eric Marshall, Paul Gagan, Jimmy Pate, Kenny Blundell, John Stedman, that sort of group of people from the Lowlands School. Bob had, at that time, was travelling over every week to Liverpool, which is quite a journey, quite a commitment, really. So we've a lot to thank him for bringing that to our West Craven neighbourhood. And Skipton would be about 9 miles from where I lived, so not too bad for me. And that's what we did. We fitted in, we got going with the jiu-jitsu and stuck with it for the next 17 years in that particular club.
Yeah. I'm going to pass you on to Dave. I know Dave's got some questions for you, John.
Hey, John. I suppose that starting jiu-jitsu at that time must have been very exciting because it was expanding across the UK, coming out of the lowlands. It was a very exciting time, but there was a lot of kind of, I guess, with that rapid expansion came a lot of different groups forming, different splits happening, different kind of philosophies developing. It must have been a very interesting time to be a student. What were your reflections on the events of the 80s and the 90s, and how did you kind of maintain your direction, or what guided you through that period?
Yeah, you're right. It was the turbulent times through the mid 80s to late 80s, I suppose. What had been quite a niche activity, martial arts in general was quite niche in the 70s, really exploded into the 80s. I think general fitness did. I remember some of the aerobics classes, for example, that were huge, in sports centres. People seemed to be flocking to sports centres to grab any kind of fitness training. So there's certainly a boom at that time, which martial arts enjoyed, I suppose. The downside was the classes started to become quite unwieldy, actually. The numbers were so great. They were very difficult to manage. I think that's probably where some of the weapons kata crept in quite a lot, where it became sort of a method of being able to manage sort of large numbers of people in a class. Yeah, there were splits and people going off and doing their own thing and so on. So yeah, there were turbulent times, but I think by then we'd kind of invested enough time to feel as though we didn't just want to lose it all. We wanted to build on what we learned. So we basically just battled through it, just carried on with our training in the classes that we could attend. And through the 70s and 80s, that journey continued without any real problem for us. Bob's empire was growing rapidly through the 80s. His classes spread all over the Northwest, which it was a good thing because we could train every day if you wanted, sometimes twice a day if you could have the energy or the go about you to do it. So there were good times. There were some very good people training there. I had some great people to train with and train among. Some of them, like Richard Asbury and Philip Atkinson, I'm still training with today. So, long-term friendships formed in those days. So throughout this turbulence and splits and all the rest of it, we managed to keep going and just keep doing our thing, really.
Talk about, John, setting up your dojo. Now, I've been lucky enough to go to your dojo. It's a lovely, lovely little dojo. Talk about how you came about getting your own dojo, and the pros and cons to having your dojo.
Yeah, okay. The sort of the 90s, by the time we got into the 90s and the mid 1990s, we'd broken away ourselves. We'd formed Bushido. Sorry, this was pre-Bushido. We'd formed West Craven Jiu-Jitsu Club, which eventually became Bushido Barnholdsvik.
Yeah.
And we'd gone our separate way at that time. This is probably 10 years later than what Dave was referring to earlier. And we'd got established quite well as a good quality little training group, but then we were operating out of church halls and any places we could hire and putting the mats away when we finished training and all that. Excuse me. Sorry, I don't know what that was.
It's okay, John.
Okay, so having already established our own identity or our own training group, we were an established sort of jiu-jitsu club. We didn't have a home as such. We were renting premises wherever we could get them. And then Helen, my wife Helen, found she was working as an estate agent at the time, or working in an estate agent's office, and she came across an advert for a property in nearby Earby. So Bonalswick is the place where I hail from, and where our club was originally centred. Earby being the next small town, and an old bakery. The building was originally built as a bakery in around the 1900s, somewhere around that. And it was for sale. It's a bit of an oddity as a building, because I think it's quite limited in who it would be any use to, but it's absolutely perfect for us. It's a functional box, really, as a building. It's ideal because it's no windows at ground level. It's northern light roof, and so therefore there's no distraction, and we could just set it up as a dojo quite easily. So we bought this dojo, we bought this building for, when I say we, the four sort of founding members of West Craven Jiu-Jitsu at the time, and what became Bushido, Barnoldswick, Norman and Brenda Hudson, Richard Asbury, Philip Atkinson and myself being the four shareholders, and we were able to muster enough cash at the time to buy this building outright. It was ridiculously cheap by today's standards, and we had quite a lot of work to do at it to get it to a point where we could function properly and it'd be safe and all that. But it was the best move we ever made, the best thing we could ever have done, to have our own building, to have our own club. We weren't now using somebody else's building that was, either a pub, back room of a pub, or a church hall, or a room in a sports centre that had some other purpose at different times of day. It was always going to be our jiu-jitsu club. So when you go in the door, it looks, feels and smells like a dojo. It is a dojo, and it's fabulous. I absolutely love the place.
Yeah, I agree. It's absolutely perfect for what you need. Absolutely perfect.
And I'll just echo that, having been a visitor to Barnoldswick Bushido. It's a terrific dojo. You guys really did a great job. It's just to follow on from having your own dojo. Often you see a lot of times when people buy or build their own dojos, it becomes more of a commercial entity, and they have to make money, fill the hall, make money. And you obviously didn't do that. You didn't feel that pressure. I'm just wondering what your view is on. I mean, was that a conversation you had with your co-owners? And how do you think that business interests changed martial arts?
Yeah, it's a good question. Various different observations over the years. For a start, I'm not anti-profit. I don't think profits in itself is a bad thing. And if people have got overheads and a dojo does take some running, then you need an income to be able to sustain that. Or normally you do. Our dojo is a little bit different. As I said, it was very, very cheap when we bought it. We didn't need a mortgage. We could buy it outright, and its running costs are very low. So we have that rare luxury of being able to afford it, even if nobody trains there. Ideally we'd have an income, and we do, but it isn't a burden. We don't feel pressure to have numbers in through the door. And that's a huge benefit to us in being able to set our bar high. We can set our standard of our session high. We expect a lot of people who come in and train with us, and they always deliver. But we don't have to compromise that to get numbers through the door, which is very important to us. But then again, we're a small town, so we don't have a large catchment area anyway. So we're always going to be a small club. I'm more comfortable personally among a small group of dedicated, hardworking people than I am in a city sports centre with hundreds of people around. So generally speaking, it fits us very well, and we haven't had to compromise our technical standards to be able to manage it. Having said that, I think sometimes there's a suggestion that a professionally run club there's this phrase McDojo that gets used quite a lot, that one naturally links to the other. And I don't think that's necessarily true. It's quite possible to run a profitable enterprise and still have very high standards, isn't it? I mean, if you look at the Gracie brand, for example, that must be a financially lucrative brand, I imagine. But I don't think there's any question that the standard of the people involved is anything less than very high. So
yeah,
I don't think one necessarily means the other. Overheads need paying, as we said. I think professionalism, I've thought about this often, and somebody once said to me that they themselves felt as though they'd become a better instructor by being professional, because they didn't feel that they were tired at the end of a long working day and going to their class in the evening and snapping at people because they had a bad day at work and all the rest of it. So I think there's an element, that's a plausible argument, really. So again, if people want to be professional and they can make a go of it, I don't see anything, I don't really have a problem with that. It's not what we want. We do it for love, not for money. We've always said that, but we have jobs, we have well-paying jobs ourselves. I say well-paying jobs, we can sustain ourselves without needing an income from the club. So that's how we run things. I think the problem isn't so much professionalism. I think the problem is when Sensei stops training. I think if running a dojo means that you yourself don't have time, or tell yourself you don't have time to be a practitioner yourself and to train, develop yourself, that's when the problems start. I think when you step off the mat, the longer you leave it, it's very hard to get back on, isn't it? So, nothing wrong with being professional, as long as you're still prepared to get involved and lead from the front and be a student as well as an instructor. I think we often polarize in martial arts as, we jump from student straight to instructor and sort of never the twain shall meet. But we're all practitioners, really, aren't we? We're all at a different stage on the same journey, really. So I think as long as we keep investing in our own development and, training when we need to train and getting among it and not sort of stepping back too much, I think that can all work. I think any fees, though, must be justified. If you're going to charge students fees, they should be fair and reasonable fees, and they should be justifiable. The one I have a problem with most is grading fees. I've always had a problem with grading fees. I never understood what the concept of grading fees. I always feel that when you've worked hard and you've put a lot of effort in, and you've reached a point where you're ready for an advancement, you should feel great about that. If it should be tough and you should go through it, and shouldn't be necessarily always pass, but if you work hard, you do well, you're lucky enough to pass, you do your best, on the day it all works out for you, you should go home feeling that you were rewarded for your hard work, not that you'd bought something, shouldn't you? That's how I feel about it. And I think the grading fees can sometimes stray into that area where they become part of someone else's income rather than a justifiable expense. That's fair enough, and there's admin fees that go with things like producing certificates and so forth. So I get that. It's just the disproportionately high grading fees trouble me. That's all I'm saying.
Yeah, I think you've made, like, in that statement there, you've made 3 or 4 very valuable points, John. We're gonna you just touched on about Sensei not training and stopping training. Let's discuss your cross training, okay? Because, like, I know that you've cross trained about through multiple disciplines. So let's start with Taekwondo. So let's just briefly touch on how you got introduced to your Taekwondo, because I've been lucky enough to train with you for a number of years and work on some kicking techniques and that, which you picked up primarily from your Taekwondo. So if you just touch on Taekwondo, and then we'll work our way through a number of disciplines, if that's okay.
Okay. Well, the Taekwondo came about because my first tour of duty in Cyprus was 2012 to 2015, and I'd not done an overseas tour of that type before. So it was quite a wrench coming away from my jiu-jitsu club in Earby and then thinking, crikey, what, at my age, am I going to be able to get back on the mat? 3 years absence won't do for me at all. I'm going to have to do something to keep the machinery oiled and keep my enthusiasm up. So I looked around when I came out to Cyprus. There wasn't much going on at the time in the area where I was stationed. So I had a look at that. I didn't really want the burden of setting up a class, because then I think that I'll be doing more of the admin than I would the training. And I didn't really feel it was fair in a short space of time to set up a club, build people's expectations, and then leave. That would leave people high and dry. So I had a look at what there was available, and a guy called Jason Ainley, fantastic guy, Jason. He was running a really good taekwondo club up on one of the bases of Ios Nikolaos, up on the eastern end of Cyprus. So I popped along there and had a chat with him. And at first he seemed to be wonder what on earth am I up to? What's a guy at 6 Dan at my age then? What on earth is he up to? Has he got some ulterior motive? And we got to know each other really well after that. So after that initial sort of suspicion, I suppose, he realised that I had no ulterior motive. I just wanted a class to join and be part of. And, I suppose it is odd that somebody with my kind of experience is happy to put a white belt on, stand at the back of the class and do what he's told by Sensei at the front. But I loved it. I thought it was fine. And I didn't have any pressure to plan lessons or anything like that. I could just turn up and be a student. And I trained twice every week, sometimes 3 times when he had additional classes going, and attended various other workshops and courses and things like that. I thought I could kick. I thought I was a decent kicker for a jiu-jitsu guy, until I trained with the taekwondo guys, and I thought, wow, these guys are light years ahead of me. So that was brilliant. So they introduced me to some really great stretching and flexibility training. Had to go through a little bit of a pain barrier at first. I was pulling hamstrings and things like that, and I was starting to think, oh god, I think I might be a bit too old for this new adventure. But I just backed it off a little bit and persevered a little longer, and spent about 3-4 months just reconditioning really, and getting the conditioning right. And I started to get into it and make some genuine improvements after that. And I absolutely loved it. The training was, Jason was really orderly, good quality sessions like the ones I was used to.
Yeah.
Structured, disciplined, everybody focused, nobody chatting in corners. Everybody's having a proper session when they're there, and I liked that. So I got a lot out of it, and I brought, when I came back on leave back to my club in Earby, I was passing on all this knowledge to people, and they loved it too. Well, you can't argue if it works. You struggle to argue with something that works, don't you? It's demonstrably, you can demonstrate the success of it. People can see it, and then you can't really argue with it. So I did 3 years with Jason. We did a course with a fantastic guy called Vasilis Alexandris, and I don't know if how many people have heard of Vasilis Alexandris, a fantastic Greek guy from Thessaloniki. And I suggest YouTube, Google search Vasilis Alexandris and just watch the kicking technique. Unbelievable, really fantastic.
Okay, a bit of homework there for me. I'll have to have a look at that. I think a lot of this is the secret to your longevity as well, John. Do you know what I mean? I really do. I think that because you've dabbled in other arts, and then you've kept becoming the student in other arts, it's encouraged. Obviously, you're in great shape anyway, but it's encouraged you with your cycling. I know you've done bits of rugby as well. You know what I mean? Because you're a sportsman, it's just encouraged you to keep going through tough times over the years. Would you agree with that?
Definitely, yes. I mean, if you're not careful, you get into routine, and if you get into routine, there's no stimulus to improve. So forcing yourself out of your comfort zone into different things that you're not familiar with, it's good for your general development, I think. I mean, you've got to be a little careful that you don't become like a social butterfly and just giving everything a light touch and becoming a jack of all, master of none type person. You've got to be a little careful there. But as long as you keep your core principles, your core training solid, and then go off and do these other things as additions to what you've already got. I think it works. I've always enjoyed having a go at things. Just challenging myself really. I wouldn't, you think, oh, I wonder if I could do that. Well, I won't know unless I try.
Yeah.
Let's give it a go. So I mean, I'd encourage any jiu-jitsu student to play rugby. It's a fantastic game.
Yeah.
And nobody respects your belt there. You certainly won't be able to sort of ride on any of your laurels. You turn up, you play, and you're expected to pitch in, and you'll get trampled if you're in the way. And I liked that as a good leveler. I like the combat element of it, but I like the way that everybody's treated equally, and you either put up or you get hurt. And afterwards, though, the fantastic spirit in the bar. It's true what they say about rugby. It's warfare on the pitch, but it's absolutely brilliant in the bar after everybody's having a pint and whatnot. So
Yeah.
great to get involved with. Good for anybody with a combat type base. It's a fantastic game and a fantastic way of being able to test your physicality, I suppose. I've done other things. I've always done fitness work ever since I started training martial arts. I used to do a lot of fell running when I was younger. So my cardio and my engine's always been really good.
It is
in
good, yeah.
really good condition. Yeah, and I think that stood me in good stead. I think probably I probably did a little too much of the running early on to build the body mass. You're very lean if you run, so you don't build the body mass that sometimes helps you in your grappling. But it's a bit of a trade-off, really. A bit of a compromise, but an acceptable one. It worked for me. I did a lot of mountain bike racing, road cycling, or anything that sort of makes you puff and blow a bit, just test your cardio. I always found, really useful. But it's mental as well as physical, isn't it? It's just keeping your grey matter challenged as well, and keeping yourself grounded by just wondering if, just testing yourself a little bit, I think.
Yeah, no, your cardio's ridiculous, especially, when we're training in 40-degree heat in Cyprus doing throw for throw, and you're up and down, you've got to have a very good level of cardio. And when we were training for my third dan, you were keeping the pace with me, which ultimately led to me training for my third dan. So it speaks volumes for your cardio. Just before I pass you back on to Dave, I just want to, we're going to talk about BJJ a little later on, okay? But I want to talk about your sword work and your journey there. So I've watched you do sword kata. I'll be the first to say I don't know anything about sword kata. I've done one kata ever in my life to pass my second dan. Okay, I practiced it, I drilled it, and that's the only one I've ever done. Can you just talk briefly on your journey with the Aido, and go from there, John. Go on.
Yeah, no problem at all. Well, I suppose my first introduction to sword work generally came about during the early 80s when the BJJ and more so when it became sort of more WJJF influenced. A lot more weapons came into the syllabus then, and sort of sword got kind of lumped in with that first. And we just, we got hold of some weapons, and we got some cattle, and we were up and down the dojo, repping the work and doing the best we could. But then I realized fairly soon that the sword stands alone. It's not. It's an art in itself. It shouldn't be grouped in with other Japanese weapons. I don't think it is a standalone special skill. And so learning Iaido properly from an Iaido instructor is the right way to go. And giving yourself some proper kit and equipment and being taught properly is the right way to do it. But I find it fantastically therapeutic, I suppose. It's really good mental training. Striving for perfection of every move is challenging in itself. It's a different challenge completely to being battered around a mat or putting the gloves on and sparring, whatever whichever aspect you choose. It's very, very different in terms of mental discipline, but it's very, very challenging and very, very fatiguing, actually, even though not overtly physical. it's mentally tiring to strive for that perfection over several hours. Now, I've never really completely focused on Iaido. My friend Richard Asbury has, and he's doing fantastically well with that. I did have a period of about 15 years perhaps of regular practice and good quality practice. I managed to get to Shodan Iaido in around about 2000, I think it was. And I've always, I don't practice every day. I don't practice every week even, but I do practice fairly consistently. I've got my sword out here in Cyprus with me and my hakama and all the rest of it. Now I go and book a squash court and lose myself for a couple of hours among the sete kata sometimes. So I just keep that pot simmering. It's something I've done for, I don't know, 40 years, I suppose now, but never really as seriously as a proper Iaido person. I don't never pretend to be, but I do enjoy it.
Good.
I wonder if we can just touch upon your training, John. And I guess, having trained in other martial arts, you'll have perspectives from those as well. But I want to talk mainly more about the British Jiu-Jitsu and the balance in the class, or how you maintain a balance, of what you perceive as the right balance between the kata-based aspect, where you're practicing some dangerous moves, versus the more continuous elements. Do you think that how you view that over time, or how you manage that within quite a vast syllabus over the course of your training, has that changed, or do you have views on how that might change, or how you see that?
It's a very good question. Yeah, it's fundamental to all that we do, isn't it? And I enjoyed listening to. Was it Clear? Have I said the man's name correctly? He gave a great podcast. I really enjoyed that, and I enjoyed hearing what he had to say about kata from a judo perspective. I agreed with everything he said. That when we talk about kata, I suppose within the jiu-jitsu context, I have to define what we're actually talking about, because it's quite common to go into a jiu-jitsu class or even a jiu-jitsu national competition and see people doing unarmed karate style solo kata, isn't it? And it's also quite common to see them doing solo weapons kata and so on. I think what we're talking about here is the uke versus tori regular practice of predetermined techniques with people with a defined role, as clearly described, in the jiu-jitsu class. And he pointed out that from what he'd seen, jiu-jitsu is mostly that, and I agreed. I think it's essential that uke versus tori repetition of correct technique in controlled circumstances is the right way to polish and have the proper version of a technique. I think it's a tried and trusted method, and I think it works. I think the danger is that you can't just do that. You've got to stress test your work. You've got to do combat-based work where you don't know what's coming at you. You know there's an attacker coming at you, but you're not going to know what. Because the jiu-jitsu that I practice, I'm glad you said British jiu-jitsu there, because there seems to be a recent polarization of Brazilian versus traditional TJJ. I don't really do TJJ. I'd call what I do British jiu-jitsu. It's a modern jiu-jitsu, really, isn't it? I think British jiu-jitsu is a worthy term for it. So seeing the polarization between Brazilian jiu-jitsu and British jiu-jitsu makes perfect sense to me, that Brazilian versus traditional doesn't quite make so much sense to me. So from that perspective, our jiu-jitsu, my jiu-jitsu, is its primary purpose is to defend oneself against an untrained attacker. So it's not built for competing like for like with a competing athlete with similar skills as judo is. Its focus of its syllabus is really about defending oneself against random attacks coming at you, and you're practicing your self-defense techniques against a compliant person to be able to perfect the move, and then you need to test that in I hesitate to say a randori situation. It's not quite the same as how a judo player would do that, but you need to test your work. We use lineups, we use circle techniques, we use one in the middle of the mat, defend yourself. People are coming at you, you have no idea what it's going to be, defend yourself. Now that's stress testing the work that you've practiced. And if you do it well, you'll get a decent version of your technique that you've been practicing in kata form to work under pressure against somebody who's not being compliant. So the competitive edge, is it possible to have competition or have competitive training without it being in a competition format, if that makes any sense? I think so. And if anybody trained, I say at the Lowlands back in the 70s, or in our clubs under Bob Ashworth in the 70s and 80s, and in our club now in Earby, you'll feel competition from your opponent. If Richard Asbury will hit me right now, if he and I were training right now and I didn't block, he would hit me. I don't mean, I mean he would hit me properly, full on, if I didn't block right. And he won't, he wouldn't tolerate me coming up with any kind of wishy-washy techniques. So after work, he'd just look at me a bit puzzled and say, "What are you playing at? What's that?" And then that's how we are with each other. We always have been. I won't tolerate sloppy technique from him. He won't tolerate sloppy technique from me. And in that sense, you introduce competition, don't you? Even though we're not playing for a trophy, we're not playing for points, we are competing. There is a competitive edge to that training, and we're stress testing our work. That's what I suppose I'm trying to say.
Yeah, you're pushing each other. I think I remember doing circle work. You don't really see many dojos doing circle work today, do you? I totally forgot about that. I'm really glad you brought that up, John.
I think Dave's point is well made. I think what we're saying is that I think there has been a stretching out of the kata element, and I think we've lost our balance a little bit, or certainly some clubs have, where it's almost all kata, and that's the whole, that's the whole session. So, well, that's all right to a point, but if you're going to call yourself a fighter, you're going to have to fight, aren't you? At some point, you've got to be able to demonstrate your work. So we need to be a little careful there. Having said that, if clubs, I suppose, martial arts to a point has stepped into the void where things like organizations like Cub Scouts, Girl Guides, gender neutral guides, I guess now, Boys and Girls Brigades, as they were at the time. And when I was young, that's where we would go to socialize and to become to have a hobby and to meet other people and so on. And I think martial arts to some extent has stepped into that void, and I'm fine with that. That's absolutely fine if it fulfills that need. And then if young people then can get good guidance from almost like secondary parenting, isn't it? So we're supporting the primary value giver, if you like, the parents and the school teachers. Clubs like jiu-jitsu clubs and judo clubs, karate clubs can bolster that, and we can all help people and steer them down the right path. We can all help in doing that, and that's hard to argue with. It's a good thing. But is it martial arts' job to do that? Well, I don't know. As long as you're honest about what you're doing, and you're not trying to tell people that that you're giving them skills that you can't possibly genuinely promise to give them, I think it's okay. I think the danger is if people send the wrong message, if people aren't honest and they're telling people, I hear sometimes parents are a little deluded, aren't they? They think, oh, I'll bring my kid along to the jiu-jitsu class, and then they'll be able to knock out a 6-foot bloke and all that. I think, don't be ridiculous. Don't stop talking like that. But I think there is some instructors might just pander to that sometimes. We've got to be a little bit careful. We've got to be honest about what we're capable of and what we're not.
Just to pick up on some of that, John, I think, and I know, I mean, your training is, I mean, having trained with you, I know the level of your training really well. But I feel sometimes in dojos there is a tendency to make, where you don't have such an extent of pressure testing, the moves can become too elaborate. And rather than being high percentage self-defense moves that you can perfect and rely on, you end up doing combinations of, as you progress, as you become more senior, rather than just doing basic moves better, you're doing moves with greater complexity that are much more elaborate. And the actual gap between that being a useful technique rather than a demonstration of memory or an art, just I think it maybe the further you progress, for some people perhaps it can detract your actual martial abilities. I don't know, what do you have you how do you feel about, do you think about high percentage techniques and what you're drilling?
I think sometimes instructors are guilty of satisfying their own curiosity rather than developing the students. They themselves are interested in more elaborate variations and so on, so they're living that out through the students sometimes. I think our syllabus, the syllabus that I practice, probably has far too many techniques in it, if I'm brutally honest, and I've never really sat down and done a proper purge and a proper trim. It's something we're going to have to really look at, because I know as we talk a little more about sort of amalgamation of groundwork, good quality groundwork, BJJ and standing game, there's going to have to be some space created to be able to find the training time to do that. And in order to do that, we're going to have to purge some of the more superfluous techniques, I suppose I might say, to create the space for what I'd call more meritorious work. So I think it's a concept. I think if we just stick with the same thing all the time, we go stale. So we have to evolve and we have to keep developing. But I think adding techniques to an already crowded syllabus is not the way to do it. We've got to properly decide what fits together and develop configured defense techniques rather than just a product of assembly. I think that's partly a problem for our syllabus, that it's had a lot added to it over the years without perhaps needing that.
Okay, so what we're going to do, John, we're going to move on a little bit with the schedule, and we're going to talk about BJJ a little bit, okay? And I want to know what your first thoughts were on BJJ, training with me and coming to House of Jiu-Jitsu with Konstantinos. What were your first thoughts on the sport of BJJ?
The first time I trained with you, I honestly thought that I was bigger, stronger, more powerful, and more experienced than you, and you'd struggle with me. And quite the opposite happened. Your technique was so well developed. It's like a chess match, isn't it? I think we've used that expression before. I'm absolutely fascinated by it. The skill level that you guys have gone on to learn is light years ahead of anything I've got in my ground game. So I'm just fascinated by it. I just love the little tricks you play, the little hooks you bait. You bait the hooks and I take the bait, and then before I know it, you've got, I'm going unconscious without even realizing how I got into that mess in the first place. I absolutely loved it. As soon as I practiced with you, I was fascinated by it. I could see straight away how much you'd developed and how far down the road you got. And then we went along together, didn't we, down to Hodge, where you'd already been training. But I saw that it wasn't just you, that there were lots of people with a high degree of skill level too. Konstantinos is a fantastic guy. He's a lovely bloke for a start, but his skill level is absolutely superb. I like the way he runs his classes. I like the way that he'll always roll with the students. He's not going to hide in a corner. He's going to be in among it with all the rest. And what took me a little bit of getting used to was it's slightly more casual on the mat, isn't it? The people will overtly question. That might be just a Cyprus thing, I don't know, but people will overtly question the teacher, and sort of, I've seen them do it to you. Oh, Gavin, are you sure that'll work? What if he does this? What if he does that? I'm not used to that in a dojo. You wouldn't see that happening in the more traditional Japanese end of the jiu-jitsu, would you? So I mean, in a way, it's very healthy, because being able to, as an instructor, being sort of held to account now and again is probably no bad thing. But it just felt a little bit odd and took me a little bit of getting used to. But the sessions are so good. I find it's kinder on the body. As an older guy, doing my best to keep going, I know there's a limit to how long I can get slammed about on the mat, and I'm probably coming to the end of that if I'm brutally honest. But I think the ground game, I can go home from a Brazilian jiu-jitsu session feeling in a lot better shape than I don't have quite so many aches and pains from it.
Yeah.
So I think it's something I can do as I'm not finished yet. I think I can certainly develop on the ground from learning with you.
Oh no, it's definitely like there's not as much impact, and obviously you got to be careful with your joints when people put an arm bar on or a knee bar, but you've always got the ability to tap out. And I do find, like, for myself, it's when I was training my third dan with you, walk going home and walking around in the afternoon after doing 100 throws, I found it heavy on my body as well. So I feel the BJJ is lighter on the body. Linking that in with British Jiu-Jitsu, what do you think the British Jiu-Jitsu can take from the groundwork?
Well,
The
I
strengths
think
of it.
it fits together so well, doesn't it? I mean, I'm reasonably happy with nobody. If you're a dedicated martial artist, you're never going to admit to being happy with your own standard, are you? You're always going to want to do better. But I'm reasonably happy with my standing game. I'm reasonably happy with the powering blocking technique, for example, and the hardening of the arms and how well they can be used as weapons. I'm reasonably happy with my striking, atemi, standing, locking, throwing technique, and so on. I'm reasonably happy with all that. But I've one or two ground fighting techniques before I trained with you. But there's a whole world of ground fighting that's developed beyond anything I could have understood. And it's still developing, isn't it? It's developing at a rapid pace. I can see that. But I think it fits together so well. It fits together naturally. It is jiu-jitsu, isn't it? It's that fascination of yielding when you need to yield, or powering in when you need to power in, and looking for vulnerabilities and looking for understanding how anatomy works and how a joint can be manipulated and all that. That chest pressure, that's so fatiguing, isn't it, when you get hard chest pressure and you lose your oxygen levels drop because you can't get proper breaths in and all that, and the science behind that and learning how to do it and making that instinctive. It's all fascinating. So for me, it's all about as I go forward, I'm thinking less and less about karate-based katas, and I'm thinking more and more about the natural partnership of a standing game that then flows into a ground game.
Yeah, which you're going to look at introducing into, like, your when you return to Ban Oldswit, looking at introducing more of that working towards your with your syllabus-based stuff. Yeah.
Already am. Yeah, whenever I get a chance to go back home, I'm already trying to take a few things back with me and just plant a few seeds, and the students lap it up. Richard loves it. So I'm not having to force this medicine on our people. They love it. They're already benefiting from that.
So I have just a couple of questions left, John. Really, I mean, it's been an incredible journey you've been on. What's next, do you think, then? Or what are your next immediate plans in jiu-jitsu? And the second question is, if you could go back to that pub when you were 19 years old and advise a 19-year-old John Idle, then what his journey would be like, or what you should do, what do you think you'd say?
Yeah, that's a great question, actually. Right, as far as the here and now, I've got 4 months left in Cyprus. I'll continue on my twice weekly jiu-jitsu sessions with the guys down at Akrotiri Martial Arts Club. I'll get my cycling in during the week. I'll get to the gym, and I'll carry on doing some sword work. So I'll keep my pot simmering as best I can while I'm here. But with all due respect to the chaps I'm training with and teaching here, they aren't of the experience and caliber of the students I'll be with and the instructors such as Richard that I'll be training with when I get back. So I'll have a bit of a journey there of reconditioning and reintegrating back into my home club. I'll have to be a little careful how I do that because Richard's done such a fantastic job of sort of running the club, running the whole thing while I've been up here, there and everywhere doing my stuff, that I need to be careful not to tread on his toes. So we'll need to work out together how we're going to integrate that and how we're going to get, how I'm going to bring back some of this good work that Gavin and I have talked about, and how I can integrate that into the work that we already do without it being a confrontation and without it being a difficult thing to manage. So that's going to be quite tricky and challenging, but I'm sure we can do this. Richard and I have known each other for so long and trained together for so long and are of a similar mind most of the time on most things. So I think we can work together and come up with a plan that we can both support and be happy with. Coming to what would the 64-year-old John Idle say to the 19-year-old version of himself? Blimey, what a great question, actually, isn't it? Because what would any of us say to our younger selves that avoiding pitfalls of life and so on? I wouldn't change a huge amount. I think I'd make. I tend to procrastinate sometimes when I should have been more decisive earlier. Made definite changes earlier. I would definitely say cross train, do that works, but keep your core principles and cross train around that. I would definitely say get on the mat and train. I don't care what grade you get on the mat and train, and don't shy away from that. That's what you need. Everybody needs it. Somebody once said to me, "Why are you getting thrown about these days? You've nothing to prove." I said, "I have." We all have. You've got to justify your existence. You've got to justify the grade you're walking about with. You can't do that unless you practice and do your work. So I wouldn't change a huge amount. I'd probably be a bit more clinical in some of my decision making earlier. That's what I would do.
I want to discuss my third Dan. Okay, so I did my third Dan last year, and I just want all the viewers to know, and everyone out there, that I got my third Dan because of you. Okay, I had a 16, 17-year gap with the British Jujitsu, and I never ever thought I was going to reach third Dan. So when we were training in Akatiri, I would be doing a bit of the groundwork with you. You'd be taking me also. We'd split the sessions. We'd be taking me through the syllabus stuff. And then you got me back. You practically got me back going again, which I'm very grateful for. As I say, I achieved that because of you. And I just want to say thank you. I want everyone out there to know how much I appreciate it. It was an honor to do my third Dan and to have you as my lead instructor with that as well going forward. I don't know if I'm saying to Dave last week about whether I'm going to work towards a fourth Dan, because you're up where you are and I'm down where I am. It's hard to get, you need that training partner, that regular training partner. So, but I just want to thank you for everything you did for me there, John, over them 2-3 years there. And it was an honor to share the mat with you.
Thank you. That's a lovely thing to say, and thank you for that. It wasn't my achievement; it was yours. You did the work. You had a good grounding. You've been taught well. You've had a very good grounding. You needed to do a little bit of reconditioning, didn't you? I think that's understandable. The recondition of your limbs and so on, the blocking surfaces and all that stuff, and the being thrown. I hadn't properly understood how you were suffering sometimes after. I hadn't really understood that very well enough until you mentioned it, and I do sometimes take that for granted. So you did go through the mill a bit, but you got back to it. Didn't take you long, and I want to see good people properly recognised in the pecking order, as it were. You should be where you are. Really pleased to see you get your black belt Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu. I thought all day long you deserved that, and really pleased to see you in your proper place, properly recognised for the good work that you do. So and selfishly, I got a hell of a lot out of train too. I wasn't just giving, I was getting as well. So we both got a really good session out of it, I think, and improved because
Yeah,
of
it
it.
worked well together. Dave, we're going to start bringing the podcast to a close. Dave, have you got anything for John?
Just to say thank you very much, John. It's been a pleasure speaking to you. I look forward to training with you when you're back in the UK.
Absolutely. I look forward to that too.
John, is there anything you want to touch on before we finish, mate?
I think that just like you say, longevity. I've been going a few decades now, and I'm still not finished yet. I can't do all the things I used to do, but I can do a hell of a lot more than nothing. And that's the message to anybody out there. Whatever you can do, do. And if you don't do nothing because you can't do everything, nobody can do everything. So take that, find good people to train with, turn up, keep going, and you never know where you might get.
Yeah, well, that was, do you know something? I was going to finish the podcast with what you sent me on your bio. So find good people to train with, turn up, keep going. You never know where you might get to. I think that's a great statement. Absolute great statement. John, go on. Sorry. What were you going to say?
Not at all.
Yeah, I was just going to say it was an honor to train with you. It's an honor to know you, and thank you for coming on the podcast, mate.
Well, you're very welcome. Thank you for having me.
Anytime. Thank you.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
There's a brand new podcast on the scene talking all things martial arts. If you've never seen a podcast, it's a brilliant place to start. So like, subscribe or download to the best thing on the net. Yes, he really is that tiny. Please do not adjust your set. You can watch it on your telly. You can listen on the go. Tell all your friends and family. Tell everyone you know. Feel free to leave a comment. Tune in, give us a share. The only host that I know gets his keys from Build-A-Bear. The Gavin Davis Podcast. The Gavin Davis Podcast. Jump on board, we'll have a real blast on the Gavin Davis Podcast. A captivating podcast streaming straight into your house. He's a little pocket rocket. He's the Welshman's mighty mouse. Great guests and conversations that won't bore you to tears. Thank God he's wearing headphones to hide those grapplers' ears. Gavin Davis Podcast.